Hello, good afternoon or good evening, everybody. Big welcome to the Buddhist Society, and this is one of our special public Zoom talks. From time to time, we do things on gardens, because gardens are something which, without language, without speech, without intellectualization, can lift the heart and bring you close to what the Dharma is actually about. The last one we did was in Eccleston Square Gardens, and those of you who were there will vividly remember the description of the way the garden was built up and our wonderful speaker. But tonight we have with us Alan Clements, and he has a garden in Bonsall in Derbyshire, a beautiful garden, which we featured in the middle way in the color section. And Alan has visited over 30 countries, particularly Europe, India, China, Japan, and Tibet, and his knowledge of international marketing has led him to give talks at events and workshops in Europe, India, and China. He's worked closely with the Tibetan government in exile and His Holiness the Dalai Lama, and in 1998 to 2002, Alan led a project for the Tibet Relief Fund to give financial support to the Tibetan settlements in the restricted areas of Arunachal Pradesh, India. And in 2003, as chairman of the Tibet Relief Fund, UK, he oversaw the setting up of Gyuto, now Empowerment the Vision, a trust based in Delhi, and is a self-reliant and dynamic Tibetan community outside Tibet to promote and support Tibetan youth empowerment. And it's something that we all would, very much like to see, all of us, all members of the society, no matter from what particular religious section or origin we come from. But anyway, I won't take up any more time, but give a big welcome to Alan. Alan, thank you very much. Alan is speaking from Tibet room in his bed and breakfast in Bonsall. And so, Alan, over to you.
Thank you very much, Desmond. I'm assuming I now go full screen with my slides. Well, Cascades Gardens, as you say, in Bonsall in Derbyshire, a garden that I've developed over many years. And my talk today is about developing that garden, but my spiritual journey along the way, gardening with nature. We call the garden the meditation garden because it's very much inspired by my travels in Japan, looking at Japanese gardens and studying Buddhist philosophy. It's a celebration of nature, a very natural garden, a place for peace, relaxation, and meditation. It's very much been a gateway into understanding gardening and spiritual awakening. My experience has been over the years that spiritual awakenings happens very slowly, incrementally, as our experience of nature, ourselves, and the world develops. I believe that developing Cascades Gardens over this period and visiting some of the world's most spectacular landscapes and places has helped me develop an insight and experience of nature in its widest sense and our true nature. I don't know about you, but in England, in primary school, many children still seem to be given, as I did when I was 5, a bean seed, a bit of blotting paper and a glass to grow the bean seed. Amazing experience for a little one. And I certainly still remember it very vividly. But did I realize it was a miracle of nature, the very essence of life? Probably not. But it did start me off and give me a lifetime of being in awe of nature. And in 1953, seems a long time ago, when I was 5, my very first serious book was the children's Pilgrims Progress by John Bunyan. Of course, it was written many centuries away. And it was all about this character Christian in his journey towards heaven, facing temptations and challenges. I became so interested in this book, I now have 24 volumes, some of them dating back to 1857, I remember. I've been fascinated by the story because it gave me a very good founding basis about Christian values and the understanding that life was a journey. When I was a teenager, I was very interested in classical music, and I was introduced to the music of Delius. Why do I mention this? It's because I saw a film, Song of Summer, Ken Russell, 1968, and I just was in awe of his story as he struggled in the last days of his life to develop some beautiful music about nature, about the countryside. The pieces were Song of Summer, On Hearing the First Cuckoo in Spring, A Walk to Paradise Garden. And I've never stopped enjoying the uplifting music of the countryside as written by Delius. 1969 onwards, I went to the University of Surrey. I started in Battersea and then ended up in Guildford. I studied human and physical sciences, and it was quite a mixture of subjects, philosophy, psychology, physics, and so on. But what I really enjoyed was the lectures on existentialism. And I learned all about Nietzsche and his ideas of God is dead, Jean-Paul Sartre being a nothingness. And I've never stopped enjoying reading about these sorts of personal philosophies. But what particularly took my notice was quantum physics and the development there, as it was quite rudimentary in those days, but fascinating about the universe and reality. But of course, like many students, growing my hair and rebelling, we were pretty off curricula sometimes, and I was fascinated by other books. These are some of them. You may recognize they're very old editions. The first we were reading was about Buddhism. We were all discovering Buddhism in those days. Christian Humphreys, of course, kicked it off. Lao Tzu's book, Tao Te Ching, 4th century BC, about Taoism, and Alan Watts, The Way of Zen. A lot of us were doing meditation courses and transcendental meditation. So this kicked me off thinking about all these issues. Well, by the mid-80s, I was in my early 30s with everything to go for. I married a pretty French girl, and we had a son. We lived in St. John's Wood in London, I remember, and I got a really good international job. We had everything to look forward to. Sadly, in those years, she miscarried. We were about to have a daughter, we hoped. She miscarried, and then a year or so later died very horribly of liver cancer. It was an experience I shall never forget. And I was really quite upset, as you can imagine at that age. Well, what's the meaning of life if someone so pretty and with everything to play for could die so horribly? Well, what shall I do? I need help. Who shall I talk to? Well, it has to be the Dalai Lama. I'll go and find the Dalai Lama. Everyone fell about laughing and said, well, you'll never get to see him. But I did, because in 1992, I was 8,000 feet up in the Himalayas, Dharamsala, big town now, of course, but in those days it was relatively small, a monastery. Went into his living room. Your Holiness, can you tell me the meaning of life? Well, he laughed, shrugged his shoulders a bit, but then he sat me down, we had a cup of tea, and he gave me the best talking to of my life, 40 minutes. What did he say? Well, I'm going to read this because I wrote it down word for word. He said, happiness for oneself and others is the main purpose of our life. Our normal day life is about hope, and with hope we can survive. But once we've lost hope, our lifespan is shortened. But in order to achieve happiness, we need peace of mind. This might not bring total satisfaction, but we first need to achieve calmness, peace of mind. Meditation can be very helpful. My view of this is based on the great Buddhist masters. The idea of Buddha nature for all sentient beings is a very good idea, involving the understanding of the theory of emptiness. Our ultimate goal is the permanent cessation of suffering. I was so inspired by this meeting, I went off and joined the Tibet Society and eventually became the chairman, but that's another story. But the first thing I did soon after the meeting, a year or two later, I went off. I have to go and explore Tibet. What is Tibet all about? I wanted to see it firsthand. Well, as you can see here, we flew over the Himalayas. This was a very lucky photograph from the aircraft. But in Kathmandu, a small group of us got together and in our vehicle traveled up into the Himalayas into Tibet. This was the first sight I had of Everest from the ground. We were about 14,000 feet, a place called Tingri, way up in the mountains there from Kathmandu. And of course, the altitude was pretty grim because we went from Kathmandu, is it 4,000 feet to 14,000 feet. But the view of Everest was just amazing. And it was just so inspiring. Traveling through Tibet, we had about a month's journey going through the various cities and into Lhasa. And the area was full of lakes. And as you can see here, Tibetan flags with prayer flags and stone piles for good luck. All inspiring views. We also went over some pretty high passes. 5,000 meters here, this particular pass covered in prayer flags. And always there were the nomadic Tibetans with their herds of yaks and their yak hair tents, quite an existence. And herds of sheep, wonderful blue wide lakes. The culmination of the journey was a special event. 10th of August 1994, it was the first time the Chinese had allowed a tanker festival. I believe now it's at Ganden Monastery in Lhasa, but these prayer flags were, tankers were lowered down from the side of the Patala. It took about 3 hours to do it, and I managed to get these very historic photographs. The end of our journey was to camp by Namtsola, the Heavenly Lake, the lake where when Dalai Lamas pass on, the priests, the lamas, go to their side of the water, meditate and try to find out the location of the new young boy Lama, Dalai Lama. It was a very special place, a fabulous blue lake, and it's the largest saltwater lake, in fact, in Tibet. The world's highest lake and saline lake. At the back of the campsite, I wandered off one day, 500 yards up the hillside, and just sat quietly in peace, meditating, looking over the lake. Look how blue it is, it's amazing. And then I just noticed this eagle going around my head, enormous eagle, and totally at peace. I'm pausing there just to remember the moment. I just had a very peaceful, spiritual moment of just this totally tranquil landscape. I was reminded a poem, 7th Dalai Lama, which I had never forgotten, an image of a kingly eagle gliding high in space, for one's mind to glide without grasping in the space of truth itself, clear and void, how excellent. It wasn't just the landscapes, of course. Some of the temples were extraordinary, well known as one of the most spiritual places in Tibet, the Jokan inside Lhasa, with the image of Chenrezig there. The Dalai Lama is meant to, is of course the god of compassion, as in Chenrezig, and it was a very mystical prayer room. We had passed through Tashilumpo Monastery on the way, the image of Padmasambhava, 8th century AD, bringing Buddhism to Tibet. and some very mysterious deities, protectors in places like the Gyantse Stupa. An amazing trip, the Tibetan trip, but I went back to England and I joined the Tibet Relief Fund and very quickly got involved in a project that was to take me all over the Himalayas and northeast India. We managed to get a lottery fund, a grant of £102,000 to take aid out to Tibetan refugees in some of the poorest settlements in northeast India. Here you can see I was discussing a program of aid. His Holiness recommended where we should go and who we should talk to, and his people managed to get us the passes to get through into this very restricted place. I think I was on repeat programs and visits, I was the only Westerner to go in a whole year at that time. The reason I'm mentioning in this, though, it gave me another opportunity to witness landscapes that were quite phenomenal, unspoilt, and just lovely and peaceful. No roads, no bridges. Here I am with a jeep. They were floating me across to get off to this refugee camp, this Tibetan settlement. And some of the mountain passes up in the Himalayas were pretty scary at times. At 7,000 feet, this particular one, with a huge drop to the right-hand side and misty valleys. But very often the road had eroded, there'd been a landslide, and we had to be dug out. Sometimes we had to stay overnight. But getting to Arunachal Pradesh, the views were breathtaking. Here you can see, looking out to the Tibetan plateau, a lovely sunset, and the rapeseed fields are bright yellow and absolutely breathtaking. It wasn't just the landscapes, the people were extraordinary. I befriended some of these ladies. They used to make me cups of tea, very spiritual people. And a place called Tenzingang in Bomdilla, right up in the north, where the Tibetans first came through from Tibet in 1959, I stumbled on an extraordinary monastery, which only in recent years have I researched to quite understand what it was. As you can see, quite unusual service. Of course, they've become quite famous now, and you can even get CDs of their chanting. One of the things I was always very interested in was this concept of the Tao, or Taoism. 4th century BC, as I mentioned before. The Tao was all about the idea of nature being in a continuous stream of flow, and by accepting, going with the flow, we could live a life of harmony. I was very lucky at the time to befriend a young German student who was a professor in Hamburg University. He was studying historic Chinese language, and he gave me this bit of calligraphy here. And well, I said, well, what does it mean? He said, well, the translation literally is how graceful it is to bend with the wind like corn. I never forgot it. It's been on my wall in my study ever since for 40 years. Wonderful memory of what the Tao is about. And a good philosophy to follow. At the same time, understanding about Yin and Yang, the two forces that go together to create harmony in the world, become balanced, united as the Tao. The most mysterious and interesting temple I ever went to that was Taoist, although I went to many in China, was in Hong Kong in 1974. You can see from the pictures here, quite dark, quite fascinating, rather mysterious. I spent a month in China in 1985 when tourism was just waking up. Although this was by no means a holiday, we decided that we would climb Emeishan. It was one of the 4 sacred mountains of China, and it started at the gateway with a Taoist temple. You can see all the fascinating roof with all the animal characters on the rooftop there. We took a lorry, a small group of us took a lorry up the mountainside, the mountain path, but they dropped us off at 9,000 feet. And well, here's the picture at 10,000 feet. By the time we'd walked 1,000 feet, we'd actually risen above the cloud level. And this is an image I've never forgotten. The trees were rather dark and dripping with moisture. And looking down over the cloud, it was like looking over cotton wool. An extraordinary view of nature. Eventually we got to the summit, 13,000 feet. And the whole point of the exercise was to go and see the Golden Temple. Unfortunately, once we got there at 13,000 feet, no one actually had bothered to tell us that during the Chinese Red Guard program, that they'd blown it up and it no longer existed. And we found that we could only stay in a little hotel, which was a wooden shack. And they gave us food from a primus stove, and ourselves and a few Chinese all had to share one very large room. It was freezing cold, well below zero, and quite an experience I shall not forget. In the morning, we came out and it was just full of mist, and we were looking over a 3,000-foot precipice into the mist, into the cloud, and our guide told us, well, can you see the Buddha? Can you see the Buddha in the mist here? Lots of people have come here in history, seen the Buddha and leapt off the precipice, and that's why it's called the leap of the heavenly suicides. Well, we went down rather chastened by that trip, but Beijing was different. We went to a Taoist temple, the White Cloud Temple in Beijing, and it was my first experience of a Taoist garden. You can see some of the plants here and trees. Doesn't look particularly oriental. And also down south in China, near Kunming, was this extraordinary 500-acre plot of limestone formations, piercing the sky almost, as it were. And you can see the scale by the people in the middle of the picture in that little, I think it was a cafe and viewpoint. An extraordinary natural place with the rocks and the formations and the shapes. So Taoist gardens, I discovered, were really all about meditation to gain enlightenment. It was the contemplation of the unity of creation, order and harmony that they believe is inherent in the natural world. A lot of symbolism in Chinese gardens. You can see here, I won't go through them all, but water is all about communication and carrying the food of life. Bamboo, the old man, willow, friendship and pleasures of life, and so on. We all know about the lotus. Lotus, of course, purity and the search for knowledge. And a lot of the plants that we would recognize, in fact, I think I have all of these in my garden. They've come over from China over the century, haven't they? The ginkgo tree, bamboo, hydrangea, particularly the aspera type, roses, chrysanthemums, and so on, and junipers. Plants we all recognize. Well, I've often asked the questions. I give a lot of talks on gardening and to garden clubs and things, but why do we like gardening so much in England? What is the reason why we all like our gardens? And you can see at the bottom of the slide there some of the answers I get back. to create something, to show off our skills, to relax, get fit, grow plants and vegetables and so on. And the National Garden Scheme more recently brought out a report in 2016 because, and there's been a lot of themes about this in recent years with the NHS and the RHS and the National Garden Scheme. Garden's all about health and mental health, and gardening can reduce mental health problems, depression, anxiety, reduce stress, combat high blood pressure, and so on. And I think, glad to see that the British are taking this on board. Even hospices are now having gardens, a place to die with dignity. Very interesting book I read a few years back, Sacred Gardens. And what I particularly liked was the foreword by the Prince of Wales. I don't know whether you've been to Highgrove, his garden, it's rather wonderful. But he sees his garden as a sanctuary, a place to escape from the world, the rush, the brutality, and so on. And his idea of the garden, it's a glimpse of paradise, a sacred space where humanity, nature, and the divine meet in harmony. And I have to say, I have a lot of respect for him and that view. Someone else, some years back now, quite a few years now, Jeff Hamilton was our favorite gardener on the television. And he talked about gardens as a way of getting close to nature, to refresh the soul. Green shoots are the very basis of life, reminiscent of my being. I also had a very eminent management consultant from Zurich who we became great friends. And he said, well, creating a garden, and by doing this, we participate in the process of life. We can become co-creators of the universe, the world. We can create our own idea of paradise. And this gave me a very clear idea of this theme. Of course, we all know that Paradise Garden started with the Garden of Eden in the Bible, a sacred space where humanity and nature work together under the watchful eye of God. And doing a bit of research, I find that in fact, the word paradise comes from the word paradisa. It's a Persian word, and the meaning is meeting of heaven and earth. And they still have wonderful paradise gardens, but they actually have the ruins here of one that started 2,500 years old. The meaning always had the different elements, fire, earth, water, air. Sometimes I think that my garden Cascades is paradise. Certainly when I open the doors in mid-February and it's just snowed and there's fresh snow everywhere, I think it's quite extraordinary. And in the summer, sitting in lush plants and shrubs and so on, it's a joy to behold in the sunshine. My little daughter thinks so too. Well, in 1996, I had a visit to Japan. It was my second trip for a month, and I visited a quite famous monastery, one of the Soto Zen founding monasteries in the Alps of Japan. And I was lucky enough to get into a meditation session and to stay for a few days and learn about Zen meditation. That's called Ourney. Well, they said, well, you can come in and that's fine, but you have to abide by all the rules of being a Zen priest or trainee Zen priest. And I said, well, okay, if you like, why not? But the smile came off my face when in the middle of the night, 3 o'clock in the morning, someone knocked on my door and said, Mr. Clements, we're ready for you, your first meditation session. And that went on for the best part of a week. Nevertheless, it was a great experience, and it started off my interest in Zen Buddhism and meditation. I'd learnt in college about Descartes' philosophy, his idea of mind and matter. I think, therefore I am viewing objects in the world and I'm different from it. But of course, this whole idea of Soto Zen broke all that down, because what it was saying is, no, we're all one, and meditation was not to try to go beyond ourselves and what we are, but to come to terms with what we are. Accept the moment, be open to the present, let go of our ego. And I've been working on that ever since. Becoming one with nature, this was a phrase that kept going through my life. Coming one with nature was the ultimate state of joy and beauty. Well, I did a tour of Japanese gardens, fascinating, and I discovered that the Chinese style of gardening had actually passed over to Japan in about 600 AD. But the Japanese developed this particular style called Karen Sansui of Japanese rock gardens. And I think we've all seen this on the television. Zen's gardens create a sort of miniature version of nature, a stylized landscape. But what I particularly liked was the idea that every garden had a meditation platform where you could sit, relax, meditate, and look over the garden. Peace of mind. Perhaps one of the most talked about Japanese gardens in Kyoto is Ryoan-ji. And you can see here people sitting on the platform, looking at the rocks, 15 or 16 stones. No one can quite work it out. But it's all about being in the clouds or islands in an ocean, but also the idea of an empty space. My favorite monastery and garden is the Daitoku-ji temple in Kyoto. It's one of the oldest Zen buildings in Japan, the Daisen Inn. I was lucky enough to have tea with the abbot. We sat on the meditation platform of this famous garden on our own before it opened, and he did a green tea ceremony, which was fascinating. You know, the brush in a bowl of powdered green tea, and we chatted. He actually had quite good English, and he explained the garden to me. He liked to make a joke too. This is the garden. You can see a combination of rocks carefully placed to indicate a mountain range, a rate gravel coming through the valley as a river, a bridge, and the clipped conifers, and very ornately restrained conifers in the background. It was a magic experience of a garden. Around the corner of the monastery was another garden, this one here. And this was quite extraordinary because it was just two piles of gravel in a raked area. You notice that the rake patterns are very precise, but basically it was all about emptying the mind. It was an empty garden. It was no thing, no mind. And that was quite an interesting lesson of meditation. I was lucky enough to have family friends of the Sumitomo family, and we were taken to their mansion in Kyoto, particularly to see their garden. And you can see in the picture here the garden. I turned out to research later that in 1929 it had been crafted by this very famous Japanese landscape gardener. I won't pretend to pronounce his name, but he was one of the finest garden craftsmen that Japan ever had. And you can see the trees there, how and the bushes, how carefully they're clipped and arranged. Quite beautiful. And here's a slightly different view of that garden. In the middle, often with Japanese gardens, there's water, a pond. Of course, we all know about the koi carp. At least an empty space with grass and so on. And the whole point of Japanese gardens, where they can, is to borrow the landscape behind, so that although this was a distinct plot of land with this family mansion, it actually looked like they had the whole hillside for themselves. Going to Nara, I visited a number of temple gardens, and was lucky enough to be taken around by the abbot of this one, and he pointed out the different features. Notice, of course, there's no plants, there's no flowers, lots of greenery, and very carefully clipped, manicured. The lawn was immaculate. The water plants in the front. Quite a beautiful spot without a single flower. But of course, Japanese gardens have a wide variety of plants as well. And you can see them here. The Cornus Kusa, the pink flowering one, is a lovely small tree we have here in the garden. Cryptomerias, which are my favorite, at the bottom middle picture, bamboo, flowering prunus, magnolia, and so on. Well, that year, 1996, coming back from Japan, and a second meeting with the Dalai Lama, as I remember, I was filled with the concept of meditation and creating a peaceful garden. And indeed, we bought a house. You can see it in the top right of the slide here, a lovely Victorian house with 11 rooms, 6 bedrooms, very stylish. But the reason I really bought it was because it had 4 acres of land. The picture, the main picture, is actually a painting of the house as it was in 1830. And quite different. It was a corn mill with this huge water wheel. And I can still imagine how it was, because there are certain features of the picture, particularly the water trough going off to the right there, which was feeding the water from the stream, and we still have that feature in the garden. So we bought this historic place and 4 acres of complete jungle and wilderness. And here is the picture from the other end of the garden, looking down towards the house. And you can see the state it was. It was a quarry, an old quarry, like a little gorge, and it was completely full of weeds and rubble, and had never really been a garden. That's the same view now. The 100-foot cliff, you can climb up and look down. This is looking down to the south end of the garden. You can see all the paths that are there. It's a long, thin plot. Lots of semi-shade and quiet corners. Very lush planting. We have a Japanese pot garden. And all the plants in those pots are some of the ones that I've just shown you on the slide. Lovely places to walk, very sheltered, 100-foot cliff on one side, 20-foot bank and 8-foot high wall on the other side. Roses in June. Little pathways everywhere. And a whole host of different plants, which I've researched over the years. I'm quite happy to let the plants self-seed. It can produce quite an interesting effect, as long as you keep it roughly under control. While in developing the garden and looking at books on design, I read a couple of books on feng shui, and I discovered that feng shui works very much with the beauty of nature. And it was saying basically to have a well-balanced yin-yang garden, you have to employ all of the earth elements and let them complement each other. And that, of course, includes earth, wood, water, fire, and metal. Well, at Cascades, we've got plenty of all of that. Here's just one example of the cliff face and the rockeries that we have. we actually have a lead mine. It's a 50-meter tunnel exploratory mine, and it's quite an interesting experience to walk along the tunnel. Lots of woodland, copses, and I actually planted 20 years ago a whole hillside of interesting trees. And we even have a bit of a stumpery where we had a lot of logs and we built a bank, and we've been growing plants down that ever since. And we're not short of water. We're not called Cascades for nothing. Waterfalls everywhere. And wherever you go in the garden, there's always sound of water. Sometimes, as you can see from the noise of that, it can be quite a torrent. In fact, that's only a tenth of the force of the waterfalls. Sometimes in the year, in February, when we get some of the heavy rains, we're awash with waterfalls everywhere. And of course, just to fill in the extras issues of feng shui, a lot of metal supports and greenhouses and so on, and we're never short of a fire or bonfire or barbecue. We shouldn't talk about gardens without, of course, mentioning good old Monty Don. And I'm quite impressed with him. In his quiet moments, he says some very deep things. He clearly is a very spiritual man. Gardening to him is regrowth and renewal, the rebirth of a year. And if you're a gardener, everyone knows how depressing January can be sometimes. And then we look forward to the spring. He also said the garden's not a place, it's a journey. Nothing lasts, nothing stays the same. But one comment that interested me most of all was this one: all of nature is in just one plant. Well, when I look at some of my photography, I've been very lucky to capture this sentiment. Here's fresh lilac with a moisture droplet, chrysanthemums, and some of my favorite flowers, the double hellebore. We must have 1,000 of these around the bottom 2 acres. But it doesn't always have to be beautiful flowers. I was fascinated by this fungus, this toadstool clump in a rotting log, all of nature. Lots of little animals. I'm never without a friend, wrens and robins, butterflies, bees, and this dragonfly. Well, over the years, this idea of being one with nature has continued to perplex me and been the source of my meditation. There's no doubt that our connection with nature creates a sense of harmony and balance and provides a source of inner peace that calms the soul. And a lot of our visitors echo that sentiment. I've realized that I've learned a lot from my garden. Simple observation teaches us about the beauty of nature. There's no doubt about that. And sitting as I do every day in one part of the garden or another, I'm experiencing this. But also birth, death, renewal, harmony, balance, all key features of gardening. But also gardening teaches us patience, impermanence, and uncertainty. I certainly have been, as photography has improved over the last 50 years, the films that David Attenborough gets involved in, the quality of the photography and the focus on the beauty of nature, I found to be a very stimulating experience. To such a point, I've finally seen that the universe is absolutely amazing. It's fantastic, it's wonderful, and that we should recognize this and be happy and celebrate our existence as a privilege of being in such a wonderful place. Well, after my university days, there was a very famous book The Tao of Physics by Fritjof Capra, 1975 or thereabouts. And basically, his idea was that he'd studied quantum physics, and he suddenly realized that not only did it tell us about the oneness of the universe, but that it supported the philosophies and beliefs of Taoism, Hinduism, and Buddhism. In fact, we probably all know that the Dalai Lama is a great one for talking with scientists, and there are many very interesting videos to that effect of the way that quantum physics supports those ancient philosophies of 2,000 plus years ago. Well, what I didn't realize until I started reading a couple of years ago is that quantum physics has really come on, if that's the right phrase, or advanced in the last 40 years. And it's really helped me have a much better intellectual understanding of reality. You know, what does quantum physics say? It says, well, we're all part of the same infinite, interconnected, and interdependent universe. We're all made of the same stuff, the same minute particles, which are wave-like and moving randomly in an electromagnetic energy field. We gain meaning from being part of this same universe. A quantum vacuum that is filled with consciousness, of which we're all aware and relate closely to. Consciousness is the basis of reality and came before space and time. It gives us life and form. It's the ground of our being. There was no creator. Well, I have to say that when I gathered the books together and read them a year or two ago, I suddenly realized that a lot of the experiences I had in meditation, which I couldn't quite understand, the feelings of being one with nature, of feeling the energy of my garden, suddenly I understood, if you like, that science had put understanding to the feelings that I'd had for years. So a few years back, we started to recognize that Cascades Gardens was a really peaceful and beautiful place to meditate. That's what we've done. I believe a garden is an ideal place for meditation, rejuvenation, and spiritual growth. And with so many big questions and ideas about life, it's important that we take time in our busy lives to reflect. That's why I developed this garden. Well, here gives you an idea of some of the meditation seats. We have about 15 scattered around the grounds, each with its own distinct view and planting. And some seats are up the hillside. Trying to grow some roses around this seat. Everywhere you go, you can hear the sound of water, the dripping water. This is the view from the house, with the 100-foot cliff there on the right. And of course, we have lots of visitors, and we have a visitor's book. And I was very touched one day. Austrian lady came along. She said, she wrote something in the book and I read it. She said, well, you know, your garden is beautiful and soothing with gifts for your eyes in every corner. And every site shows you nature is the great creator of harmony and balance. I was rather bowled over by that. I also had a little lady from the local village. She said, "Eop, midok." She said, "You've got a bit of paradise here." Lovely. Well, this is the garden at twilight. Every evening I go around at twilight. It's the quietest, most lovely time of the day. And during the day, the huge cliffs that we have on one side absorb the sunshine, and later it radiates the energy back into the garden as things cool down. The heavy silence, the stillness, gives the garden a deeply spiritual atmosphere. It's the perfect place to meditate. Thank you.
Alan, thank you very much for for a very lovely talk. Quite fascinating, very soothing, I must say. Anyway, we've got some questions for you, if you can answer them. And the first question comes from Charlie. And Charlie asks, if you've got a flat, unnatural space made up with artificial grass, what would you recommend I start with to try and improve the space with relaxation in mind?
Well, it's just a flat space with artificial grass. That's not a bad start, but why not get some large pots and fill them with some of the lovely plants and flowers that I showed in my talk. The most important thing, though, is to have a seat where you can see the sun and look at the plants and relax.
And then there's another question here now from Janice. That was fascinating. What branch of Buddhism did you feel closest to?
Well, because of my involvement with the Dalai Lama, I did meet him more than a dozen times and attended many of his teachings. I also trained in one particular monastery. It was Gelug, the Gelug tradition of Tibetan Buddhism. But I've always had a fascination for Zen, although I find it very obscure and I don't know, I can't find the word. The idea of the space of an empty cup is the emptiness, and one hand clapping and all those sorts of things I'm fascinated by, but I struggle with.
Thank you, Alan. Now, this is a question from Becky. How do you, or did you decide what plants to grow in the garden? And how long before it became fully established?
I think a garden really takes 20 years. And I've had lots of, this is actually the 5th garden that I've done. They've gradually got bigger and bigger. And I had one that was looked very good after 8 years. But to really become established, the trees and the shrubs, it's a 20-year job. The plants were easy, really, that within a 30-mile radius, I suppose I have about 20 garden centres, and I spend a lot of time travelling around the country looking for plants. I took what I found interesting, researched them, and then tried to put them in the right place. They say, don't they, right place, right plant, because it's so important that things that like shade are given some shade and sunshine and so on. So over 20 years, some things have sadly died because they weren't happy where they were. It's been a trial and error, but in my travels and research, I found out some of these wonderful Japanese and Chinese origin plants, and I've tried to incorporate those in the garden where I could.
So Alan, this is a question from Jamie. You have 5 acres of garden. Do you have to employ a lot of people to help you keep it up?
Yes, it's quite a high maintenance garden. And some of the terrain is quite difficult. I had a man abseiling over the cliff with a chainsaw earlier this year. It was a blizzard blowing as well, clearing all the brushwood. Every 3 years we clear out the mill pond and take out 100 tons of silt. So that's quite big gardening, and we have all the right tools and a local landscaper that helps us with JCBs and so on. But typically in a year I have 4 gardeners, roughly half-time each person.
So it'd be like having 2 full-time gardeners. And then how much time do you actually spend in the garden?
Well, after I stopped rushing around the world 3 years ago and I retired, I try to do a bit in the garden every day. And during lockdown, because the B&B wasn't functioning, my wife also discovered she really enjoyed it as well. So between us, we've kept things going through COVID times.
Alan, do you do a lot of composting?
Well, I don't know whether you gathered from those photographs, we have a lot of trees. And in October, November, when the leaves start to fall, it's a real challenge. I can tell you that typically we fill up about 50 or 60 black bags of well-rammed leaves in bags every year. So 60 bags, and we have 3 very large compost bins, and they all end up there. And on a 3-year cycle, it produces jolly good compost.
Mm. So you recycle everything from the garden?
Certainly, most of it's leaf mold, but we also have huge piles on one side of the woodland. We have a space where we're composting down all the weeds and the weeding that we've cleared out during the year, and that's recycled, yes.
Mm. What are your future plans for the garden?
Well, after 24 years, we feel we've done the bulk of the development, and there are these 12 discrete areas where there are the seats and so on. So I don't want to spend a lot more time creating new landscaped areas. The challenge is to maintain it to a higher and higher level and introduce really interesting and exciting plants.
Lovely. Well, I think there's, let me have a look now. Yes. Yes, there's probably just one more question here, which will bring us to neatly to the end. And that is, thank you, Alan Clements, for such an inspiring talk and for the magnificent photographs. May we come to visit? Address, please.
Well, we'd love to see you. The garden is open every day, 1st of March till the end of September, 10 till 5. We have a plant nursery, as well as the garden tour, which you can do on your own, seat to seat. And we have a cafe providing refreshments. Our house is also a B&B, and we have a number of B&Bs in the village of Bonsall. And you can come and stay, as well as have free range of the garden 24 hours a day. We're actually getting bookings now from Buddhist groups to come and do retreats. In fact, I also had a Christian group the other day who were inquiring about coming. So I think we're getting quite well known now as the meditation garden. And with all the troubles we've had in the world this year, I think a lot of people want to find a bit of a refuge and peace of mind, and we're the place for it. So we are Cascades Gardens, we're Bonsall Village, Matlock, near Derbyshire. And if you look on our website, cascadesgardens.com, you'll have all the details there. And also I have a blog and video blog, which is gardenforwellbeing.com.
Thank you, Alan. Well, can we wish you, from all of us, a very, very profitable, hopefully you can keep the garden going and successful rest of the summer. And may you have very good, happy planting. And can you give, as many people as possible the chance to see your garden and visit your garden, maybe stay overnight and have a restful weekend. Thank you very, very much indeed.
We'd certainly love to see you all, not least yourself, Desmond.
That would be lovely.
Look forward to seeing you.
Look forward to seeing you too. Bye now.
Cheers.
Cheers.